Welcome to the second video segment of the drafting summaries and memorandums of understanding. As you will recall, at the end of our last segment, we ended with a quick glimpse at this screen, interviewing clients to collect information. And so this video segment is going to be the transition piece between the beginning documents that you need and into the setup and the beginning of the mediation process, but we're not quite at the stage yet where we're documenting what's occurring during the mediation. So this is this transition period from when your clients confirm that they are your clients and you are then doing some preparation work in addition to having put that retainer in place. And the agreement to mediate, you may actually still have not finished it at this particular point in time, as far as having met with both clients in the same room to go over that agreement to mediate and have them execute it. But as we said in the last video segment, you would potentially give the draft agreement to mediate to the clients in advance of that first joint meeting so that they'd have an opportunity to read through it and be ready to sit down and look at it with the other party and with yourself as the mediator. So everybody's nodding their head in agreement to those ground rules and the basic process and understanding what your role is and what the expectations are for their participation, and really try to define maybe some of the overarching issues that are part of the reason for why they have come into mediation. So here now is some discussion around what you might be documenting during your intake process in preparation for then moving into your first joint session. So just one more time, you've got your retainer agreement in place so that your business relationship is clear as between yourself and each of the clients, and then both clients, or if it's a mediation that involves more than two people, even though we're talking mostly with respect to family mediation for the purposes of this program, all of these comments apply to any kind of mediation. And in a family mediation, though, we typically kind of think of a family system as involving two parents and then potentially children, keeping in mind that a family system is extended where there could be grandparents involved, aunts and uncles, even close family friends, and those people may or may not ultimately participate in the mediation as well. So just for simplicity's sake, though, we will be thinking about this as there being two clients, though we realize that there could be more than two clients. So you have your retainer agreement in place, which is your business agreement that defines the terms and conditions of that business relationship between you and the clients individually and together. And the agreement to mediate, which your clients have received. You've perhaps talked to them about it a little bit, but it's not until that joint session when everybody's sitting around the table together that you're reviewing it together, confirming the details, nodding heads, signing the agreement, and then continuing. So somewhere in between there, you will be having individual meetings with your clients. And during those individual meetings, you're going to be collecting information from them, some information that's data, so that you have details as to the names of the parties and birth dates and when their spousal relationship started and their date of separation, if they have confirmed a date, what is important to them about the outcome of the mediation, sort of what their expectations are, explaining what the process looks like. And this is all happening in a conversation. However, during that conversation, you're likely going to jot down some notes and you're going to document your file. And that's part of your prepare phase of the 6-step understanding-based model as taught by Adric. Just as a quick refresher, remember the pieces model, which is P is for prepare, I is for identifying issues, E is for exploring the underlying interests, You develop a goal statement, which transitions you into C, which is the create stage, where they are brainstorming options. And then E is for evaluating those options. And S is getting to solve or to satisfaction. So that very first step, the prepare phase, happens over and over and over again at different points of your process. So you are preparing as a business person at all times, right? You're always in prepare phase around things like your retainer agreements and your marketing and your intake process, etc. But then once your client becomes a client, then you are in another type of prepare phase where you're engaging in these individual either consultations or individual meetings in contemplation for a joint meeting, and then you're preparing for that joint meeting. And then in the meeting itself, you are engaging in a prepare phase in order to create some rapport, to go over some basic ground rules. If it's the very first joint meeting, again, you're going through that agreement to mediate, etc. So as part of your prepare phase, where you are meeting with the clients separately and at the very beginning of your process, and you're really doing like an interview to collect information, you're listening for their stories so that you can be developing some working theories as to what's perhaps going on under the surface. What are their priorities, their expectations, assumptions that they might have, concerns that will need to be addressed during the mediation process, and their hopes and goals, as they are not only just working through the mediation process, but beyond the mediation process. What are they hoping the final outcome will look like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, etc. And so during that interview or that intake or consultation, or just if you call it an individual meeting, you're listening and you're jotting down notes so that when you then prepare on your own for the next meeting or joint meeting, that you can take that information you've collected and you can use it to populate your file with some really important information. We're going this segment, we're going to show a demonstration of this interviewing process, and we're going to talk about what you might do with the collection of that information and populating it into your file. You may keep a physical file. Some people very much like to have paper, and then they can refer to the paper, or you may be paperless and you like to record your information into an electronic file. So there's no one size fits all on this. You can do it whichever way you want, but the point is that you're collecting the information and you're recording it somewhere so that you can refer to it later. Even if you think you have a fabulous memory, it's important to be keeping track of things as you go along. Sometimes you're going to start to collect additional information that sort of changes your understanding of the information you received at the front end. So how do we engage the clients in this process to be able to collect some information on the front end? Well, as you can see on the screen, the first thing is a very basic principle that we talk about in introductory classes to mediation, is that having an open-ended question versus closed-ended question approach to the conversation. So rather than asking the questions that can be answered in yes or no, you're asking those open-ended questions, inviting more information. So can you tell me some more about that? And then what happened? And how were you feeling at that time? And then you can always utilize those questions that come from that acronym PEACH that we use in the explore phase, because during this meeting, quite frankly, when you are having individual meetings, you are exploring, right? You're exploring to try to understand the story from that client's perspective and what their underlying interests are. So you could make a list of questions for yourself in advance to remind yourself of the acronym PEACH that you are asking the questions about. What are the priorities, expectations, assumptions, concerns, and hopes, and that at least gives you some structure if you're not entirely sure excuse me, how to engage in that open-ended question format. As you're listening and you're jotting things down, your mind is always working, right? Like, what's relevant, what's important, what are you curious about? We know that when the clients tell their story, they have lots of information that they don't even even know if it's relevant to the mediation process and the issues that need to be sorted out. And they might be sort of just, it's side pieces of information that maybe don't speak to the heart of the issue, but it still can be really important for the client to be able to tell you all that extra information. You're not writing things down to create a transcript of the conversation. You're jotting down things that are important to you as you are listening. So how do we know what might be relevant, what's important? Well, obviously some of the data is always important, like those dates and things like valuations and whether or not some documents exist and who has them, and maybe even where they are at in the litigation process. But then there are some things that you're listening for that represent something. So if they're telling a story and they keep coming back to something over and over again, that's probably a good signal to you that that is something that's really important. And it might not seem significant from an objective standpoint or a data collection standpoint, but the fact that they just keep coming back to that, it means that there's something there that they haven't found a way to express and feel like you've heard, and that they've received the validation that you've heard that. And so you might not actually get to the answer of that in an initial consultation or separate meeting, but you've made note of it to say, well, there's something here that we're going to want to explore further, and whether that's in a joint meeting or in subsequent individual meetings. It's very helpful for individuals to think about what their ultimate goal is in the mediation process. And you could just frankly ask them that, right? Say, after you've spent some time listening to their story and explored those underlying interests, you might say, if you were to look back on this experience in the future, what would your future self want to see as the end result? And parties will often tell you what their position is. So for example, if they've kind of come in, this is a proper family property distribution scenario, and they really would like to keep the family home, well, then they might answer that question by saying, well, my goal is to be able to have the family home at the end of this. And that's okay. You'll also want to ask some more questions about what is important to them about keeping that family home. Because we know sometimes it's that there's a sentimental attachment to that home. Let's say that was where they, maybe their grandparents had built that house, and that's the house they grew up in, and then that's the house that they ended up living in as a family, and it's a sentimental attachment. It might be that there's some fear that, well, if I move, I'm not going to be able to afford to purchase a new home. And why does somebody want to have ownership of a home? Sometimes that's an identity issue, or it's tied into their feeling of financial security. It may be the location of the home, that it's close to school, it's close to where the children's friends are, and they are having a difficult time imagining how it could look better. Or different, that it would look, when it looked different than what they're used to, that somehow it could be better. It makes me think of one file that we had where this is a high conflict file, and one of the things that were in dispute all along was the family home. And because the dispute went on for a very long time, they ultimately ended up losing the family home to foreclosure. And so the parent who was really attached to that family home, that held on to it for dear life, even when it was no longer practical to do so, after some time of having moved and been in a new residence, was able to look back and say, I realized that this was actually better for me to be in a different residence, because the family home was full of reminders of the relationship, and it was a relationship that person identified as unhealthy. And even things like looking at the toaster would be a subtle reminder of conversations and things that would have happened at breakfast time that were not pleasant memories. And yet there had been a real security and attachment to the family home that made it difficult for that person to let go of that and be able to recognize that a fresh start somewhere else was actually a healthier place to be in. Now, of course, as mediators, that's not our role to suggests that that's the case, but when people are stuck on what they perceive as the only outcome that's possible, that's why we go through that create phase of saying, okay, well, that's one possible outcome and that's an option. What are some other options? So just remember, in that initial intake or consultation period or individual meeting before your joint meeting, whatever you might call that, it's not uncommon for people to tell you what their wish list is, right? So if you say, well, what is your goal for this process? They might give you the list of things that they want as outcomes. And so you can hear those, you can jot those down, and you say, I recognize that these are things that are possible, that may be what your outcome ends up being. And regardless, what are some of the things that you would like to see that would come as a result of having those outcomes? So that's where you're inviting them to speak to their security interests and their fears and maybe some of their beliefs and their values that they have that are informing that decision for themselves, even unconsciously, as to why they want that as an outcome. Now, you're mindful all along as to what the purpose of your documents are for. So whether these are documents that, you have your notepad and your pen and you're just jotting down notes during the meeting, the individual meeting or otherwise, you're thinking to yourself, what is the purpose of documenting this conversation? Is it for my eyes to help me remember from one meeting to the next meeting what's been talked about and what information is important to carry over from one conversation to the next? Is it that this is information that's going to be captured in a document that's shared with both parties or just one? Is this information that's captured in a way that's going to be shared with a third party like a lawyer or a bank? And so as you're jotting down your notes, it may be that your notes themselves are not going to be the actual document, but they're going to form the document, and they may form more than one document. So maybe for the purposes just of your file, and then you're taking that information and you're putting into a summary format, either for both parties or one party. It may be a collection of your notes that you pull together, all of the various little pieces of agreement to put into that final document of a memorandum of understanding, for example. And so always keep in mind that the documents that you're creating are for different purposes. And in your agreement to mediate, you will have a clause that says that your file is a private file and it's not a file that can be subpoenaed for any third party process as evidence. Now, there are some mediators, and depending on where you work, you may actually not even take notes, or if you are taking notes, that you are not keeping the notes. The other end of the spectrum is sometimes for full transparency. A mediator might keep notes that they then take photos of, that they share with the parties, so everybody knows what's out there and they all have the same copies of everything. Or they're flip chart notes if you're going to make you're collecting the words that you're hearing and some of the issues that are being identified and the options, and when you're meeting in person, you're collecting those on a physical flip chart, or if you use an electronic like a smart board, or if you're doing it virtually, you might even use a whiteboard or a document that you share in the virtual meeting, and you simply just take a photo of it or you save it and you send it to the parties. And so what you would put in that kind of transparent document would be different than what you would probably be making notes to yourself about. So that you can, like I said before, you can use your notes for more than one purpose, but always ultimately be thinking about who are you going to share this with, and what's the purpose of sharing it, and then that'll help you know how to put that information in the document and what information should be in that document. So these are some things for you to be thinking about in those individual conversations that you have even before you start having your joint meetings. Now we're going to be meeting Bonnie and Parker in this segment, and we're going to demonstrate for you what that individual meeting might look like. But this is also forms part of an assignment, an exercise for you to do on your own. And if you recall from your last video segment where you were coming up with a retainer agreement and you're getting feedback from at least 3 other people to further refine and revise your retainer with a mind to creating something that's easy to understand, that's simple, but does clarify the business relationship. Utilize that template that you ultimately come up with and videotape yourself explaining it to somebody who's pretending to be Bonnie, somebody who's pretending to be Parker. Ideally, you can recruit 2 friends or family members, or even one person who's prepared to play both parts, so that you have an opportunity to share and go through that agreement to make sure you understand it and see how well you're able to explain it to somebody else. So you're going to do that separately, and I'm not going to run through a demonstration of that, but we will do a demonstration of having just a private conversation with each of Bonnie and Parker. Now, before we meet Bonnie and Parker, let's just capture what's going on for them. So Bonnie is a stay-at-home mom. There are 3 children. She sells Mary Kay from her home, and she has a bachelor degree in marketing. Now, this is her first time in attending mediation, and she's here because she wants to negotiate the terms of her trial separation. So we can imagine that Bonnie's probably going to have some questions about the process. Parker is Bonnie's husband, and his profession is a truck driver. He's a grade 12 education. He's had some experience with mediation because he had previously been involved in a dispute regarding a late delivery that he must have been part of as a truck driver, but he doesn't really remember much of the process. And he's here to negotiate the terms of his trial separation from Bonnie. So Bonnie coming in saying, well, I have no experience with mediation. So like I always say, she's maybe even thinking she's coming in to meditate. She doesn't know what it is that she's going to be doing. Whereas Parker, having had some experience, not even sure that he can remember it too well, but if it was in the civil context, because it was a dispute that was, as a result of his profession and it was related to delivery, the way that that mediation process would have been set up could have looked much different than how we typically engage families in family mediation. So when people come to you and say, oh, well, I know what mediation is all about, it's good for you to ask some open-ended questions to have them explain what their expectations and assumptions are. That way, you can confirm understanding, because they might be basing their understanding on some inaccurate information simply because their exposure to it before was even in a different subject area. So let's get ready to meet Bonnie. Hello, Bonnie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. So thank you for setting aside some time for us to be able to have a bit of a conversation in preparation for our joint meeting with Parker. And I know you and I briefly spoke before. You've gone through the documents and executed your retainer agreement. And you'll remember we talked about the agreement to mediate. That's something we're going to sit down and look at together with Parker at that first meeting, so that you can both agree to the ground rules and have the same understanding of what the process is all about. But in the leading up to that, I wanted to take this opportunity just to spend some time with you to better understand the situation from your perspective, and have you share with me what some of your goals are for the mediation process, and some concerns that you might have, any of your questions that you might have about how the process works. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to be jotting down some notes as we go along, and that's really to help me to remember the details of your situation. Nobody else sees my notes, that just becomes part of my file. Is that all right with you?
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, so well, let's start a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with Parker, how long you've been together. I know you have 3 children. Tell me a little bit about the children as well.
So we've been together for some time. I think 9 years. I'm pretty bad with dates. So I think we've been together 9 years. We have 3 children, and they're great kids. They're pretty rambunctious, but they're great.
And how old are your children, Bonnie?
I'm so bad with all these details. I think our son is going to be 13. I'd have to check that. And then our middle child is 9, and then our youngest is 3.
3?
Yes. And yeah, so they're rambunctious, but they're good. And our relationship is, it's just time to end things, or at least try to end things, and see how that goes. And then maybe, I think it's probably just time to call things quits. I've been at home with the children, and I'm doing pretty well with my Mary Kay business now. And he's just gone all the time with trucking and stuff like that. And it's just been hard for us to stay connected as a couple. Plus, he just has some stuff I think he would be better working through by himself. And if he had his own place and his own space and didn't have to try and worry about other things, and could just focus on himself and figuring out his stuff. And then that'll make him a better father, and maybe, if we were to get back together, a better partner.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me a little bit like you're envisioning some positive outcomes that could come as a result of your separation.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. And there are a few things that you mentioned that were like a little bit more detail wise that would be helpful for me to probably just make note of. So you mentioned your Mary Kay business, and that that's doing well now. How long have you been a Mary Kay consultant for?
A few years now. I started, I think, much the same as many people who do this sort of thing. Is I started having those parties. I had some girlfriends that were selling Mary Kay at the time, and so I hosted a few of those parties. And of course, the more people buy at those parties, the better discount you get as the party host. And then it just kind of, one of those promos came up. Lots of times these multi-level marketing companies, they have these promos that, if you sign up now, you'll get like your first shipment for free, or you'll get so much off, or something like that. So I was kind of doing the get good discounts for a while, and then I ended up signing on to be one of the downstream of one of my girlfriends. And so I think I've been doing this now, I'm so bad with dates, but I think about 3 years now, and I've just been doing really well. I'm actually, making more money doing this now than I ever made any time that I was working anywhere else. So
yeah. And so that's something that, if I understand correctly, you can kind of operate around the children's schedule, and that helps you to be able to earn some income for independence while still being able to attend to your other responsibilities.
That's
Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit about those other responsibilities. What kinds of things are the children all involved in, and what is the sort of typical family dynamic around the roles that everybody plays?
So I'm at home full time, so I'm in charge of all the domestic engineering. I do a lot of gardening, so I also am creating food for us. So we actually save quite a bit on groceries, because I garden, and then I can, and I pickle stuff. So we have food from that. So those are some of my responsibilities, keeping the house clean and organized, because that's so important when you have a business from home. You just got to keep things clean and organized. And then the youngest there is, we don't have that child in daycare or anything like that, because I'm at home. So that's good. And then our 6-year-old would be in kindergarten, but with COVID and stuff like that, and they have a late birthday in the year, so we didn't put them in kindergarten last year. And then you can put them in kindergarten as of January if you want, but we didn't. We were just going to wait till the fall. And now we're just, we're not really sure what's going to happen, whether they're going to go to kindergarten or not. So I've had those two children at home with me this whole time. And then right now with the pandemic and everything, the 13-year-old has been doing all of his classes and stuff at home. He uses Zoom, and they have like some online stuff that he does. So really it's kind of been actually like a madhouse here, very, very busy, because there's lots more cooking, lots more cleaning to do, and everyone's at home. But Parker is not at home at all right now, because during this pandemic, the main source of supplies for everyone has been from truck drivers. So he's been super, super busy, gone lots. So that's one thing that's a little bit, pros and cons to that, obviously, because then all the child care kind of falls to me, but a little less work in some ways, just because there's no interpersonal stuff with him that I have to deal with. I can just focus on the kids. So yeah, lots of cooking, cleaning, picking up after the kids. And then I try, and once the kids are off to bed, at least the two little ones, that's when I kind of focus on my Mary Kay stuff. And then when I have to host parties or meet with clients or anything like that, usually like my sister or my mom comes over and watches the kids here. So we don't really have much for any kind of childcare or daycare costs. But looking into the future, I might want that more or need that more, because I would like the kids to, live with me, and he can maybe see them every other weekend or something like that. He's just too unpredictable to have them live with him, I think. So maybe like they can do like a movie night, or they can have like a day at the beach or something like that. So I might need a little bit more help when things kind of transition.
So there's definitely a lot of things to sort out, and throughout the mediation process, it's a great opportunity for you and Parker to explore what the different options could look like around parenting, and even things like how you're going to divide your property if this child separation becomes more permanent. And during the child separation, even things like the finances, whether or not those are just related to childcare, or there are other things that you both want to put your mind to around the sharing of expenses, or separating them out so that you're clear as to what you're responsible for and he's clear what he's responsible for. And then there's a discussion around those legal issues like child support and spousal support. So these are all things that we'll have some more discussion about. And when you think about all of that, Bonnie, and what that conversation is going to look like, is there anything that you have any concerns about around how you and Parker communicate that would be helpful for me to know in going into joint meetings?
I think I'm pretty like assertive, like maybe type A or something like that. And he's kind of like more of a passive type. So it might be hard to get him to engage, I guess. And I don't obviously I want my way in all of this, but I also don't want him to be bullied, or so many people talk about, oh, the wife got everything in the divorce, or oh, she took me to the cleaners or something like that. And I don't want him to have that story that he's telling people. So I think it's important for me that he feels like he's heard and that things are fair, even if they, if this is only temporary and we get back together later on. I want him to feel because I think that'll be important if there's any chance of us salvaging this relationship, that this process goes well.
So you've identified a priority of being able to work through these issues in a way that you both are actively involved, but knowing that Parker tends to be a little bit less assertive in identifying what his needs may be, that's important for me to know in how we structure this going forward, for sure. Okay, so The other thing that, and I know we don't have a lot of time, and I'm hoping we'll get another opportunity to continue this conversation just in preparation for when we are meeting with Parker. But for today's purposes, you mentioned your sister and your mom, so you have some support people in your life. And is there anything else? So there's the Mary Kay business, there's the children and their needs, and sort of how Parker's work life works, and your sister and your mom are part of your system, and that helps keep everything moving. Is there anybody else or any other either stressors or support systems in place that are going to either cause you some concern going forward, or that are going to be particularly helpful as you work through this trial separation?
Well, a stressor in our relationship, though I think it will really be solved with us having a separation, is Parker's just not good with money. He seems to just be like allergic to it or something. Like, it doesn't even make sense how he never has money and how he's always in overdraft and always maxing out his credit cards and stuff like that, because he makes good money. So that's it's stressful and annoying. And then he kind of like takes it out in kind of like just like passive aggressive ways, like, well, you know, like, oh yeah, you have extra money because I helped you get your business off the ground, or like, oh, you know, I'd have extra money too if the kids weren't involved in this, that, or the other thing. So yeah, the oldest back before COVID and stuff was really involved in sports. So he had like a really big sporting community. There was like kind of like an additional support system for him specifically. So I think that this might be difficult on him, especially because he's the oldest and the other ones are, you know, a little bit younger. I realized that I changed my child's age halfway through this meeting. So
I changed it as you changed it as well. So, you know, your middle child went from age 9 to age 6, and I just went with the flow. So that was
yeah. So I don't really know what's going on with that.
Probably would have clarified with Parker, but
yeah, maybe clarify with Parker to see how old that middle child really is, because as a stay-at-home mom, I guess I just like, I don't pay attention to the days.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot on the go. And would it be fair to say, so you were mentioning about Parker not, you know, you have some concerns about perhaps his money management style or his money personality. And so when you talked about how he kind of refers back to money that was used to support you in developing your business, do you have some assumptions around that? You think, is it that you're thinking that Parker maybe resents your business in some way, or that is it, what's your working theory about that?
I don't really think it's like resenting my business. I think it's just like he's upset with himself that he doesn't have money for things. And so then he's just like lashing out in that way by saying like, oh, well, I would have money if I didn't support you in this, which is so ridiculous, because I've definitely paid that back in the way that I contribute to the household, and then in how much income my Mary Kay business brings in. So as you can tell, I'm very busy with Mary Kay, given that I have changed my child's age and I can't figure out how old my child is. So I'm so busy with Mary Kay, but yeah.
Well, you know, don't feel too badly about that, because you know, sometimes it's hard to keep track of those details.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I don't think he resents it. My assumption there is just that he's upset with himself, and so then he just like blames whatever he can blame for his money problem.
Well, I'm really glad we had a chance to have a brief conversation, at least. As you know, I'm going to have a chance to speak with Parker a little bit as well, to better understand his priorities as well and expectations, and if he has any assumptions or concerns that we might need to explore further in the mediation process. And, you know, I'll want to ask him some of these similar questions around what his hopes and goals are for the process. And I'll be encouraging both of you to come into the joint meeting just really with your minds open to and listening ears open to be able to hear what each other has to say about these issues, and then you can put your minds together within this process to brainstorm some of the options to try out this trial separation, and actually even figure out what all of the things are that you're going to need to figure out. That'll be the first step. So feel free to give me a call or shoot me off an email between now and our next meeting. After I've spoken with Parker, I might want to have a further follow-up discussion with you before the joint meeting, but I will be in touch with you either way.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Hello, Parker. Thank you for making time to meet with me here today. And I know that you will recall that our next step in all of this is actually to book a time where the three of us meet. So you, Bonnie, and I, and we will have things to attend to, like reviewing the mediation agreement and just identifying what the important issues are to discuss, and taking some time to explore what's important to both of you and reaching a resolution, kind of think about the different options. And so this is our opportunity, though, to have a separate conversation, just so that you can tell me a little bit about the situation from your point of view, and interested in hearing from you what some of your goals are coming out of the mediation process, and to see if you have any questions for me about how it works, or if you have any concerns. And so why don't we just start off with, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Bonnie, how long you've been together, and I know you have 3 children, and so perhaps you can tell me a little bit about them as well.
Sure. We've been together probably about like 10 years or something like that.
Okay.
We got 3 kids, a 13-year-old, a 9 or 6-year-old, depending on who you ask, and a 3-year-old.
Okay.
And yeah, so like, I mean, to be honest with you, like Bonnie is just like a little dramatic sometimes, and I'm sure that this whole thing will just blow over. She just needs some space right now. So I don't know. I'll go to mediation, I'll do this whole thing, but I'm sure we don't need to figure out anything too crazy, because it's just going to be a trial separation, and she thinks I need to work on myself, whatever that means.
So I'm going to be interested in hearing a little bit more about all of that, but just while I'm getting myself a little oriented to some of the details, and in case you noticed, I'm just jotting down some things as we're talking, so I hope that that's okay with you. It's just to help me keep track, and it's just for my file, so nobody else sees my notes. What are the names of your children, Parker?
Brian, Penny, and Stacy.
Okay, great, thank you. And you and Bonnie are still living together in the same house with the children, is that correct?
Kind of. Like, I'm on the road a lot, so actually right now I'm on the road, so I'm just staying with one of my trucker buddies. I'm long haul right now over to Manitoba, so I'm actually just in a small town outside of the Manitoba border. So I'm staying at his place right now, and then I'm back on the road again. And then when I get back to Saskatoon, maybe I'll stay in the basement, maybe I'll stay with my folks. Like, it'll just kind of depend on how Bonnie's feeling at that particular time.
So is this part of how your routine usually plays out, that you're on the road a lot, and then when you come back to Saskatoon, sometimes you're staying at the home with Bonnie and the kids, and other times with your parents?
Well, that's kind of what I'm just thinking will happen this time around, because she has in her head this whole like trial separation thing. Me staying in the basement is pretty normal, mostly because that's where all my gaming stuff is, all like my PC and my PlayStation and stuff like that is all in the basement. And then I'm not disturbing the kids and stuff when I'm up late. So I got a suite set up down there.
Okay.
So that's normal, staying with my folks.
All right. So it looks like it sounds to me like you've already been thinking about some of your options around what this trial separation might look like. And it also sounds to me like you perhaps have an expectation that it's not going to be too complicated, because it's just you had said, I think you used the phrase like you didn't have to get into too much stuff around this. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are about what the trial separation might look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just kind of think it's just something she feels like she needs to do. I don't know, her friends or something like that just saying, hey, need to do this. Like, she's got a few friends that have been separated and divorced and stuff. I feel like it's almost like, I don't know, like trendy or something. Like, there's no reason for us to separate. Like, there's nothing wrong with our relationship and stuff. So I'm just kind of like going through with it. Nothing really needs to, like, people when they separate and divorce, they got to sell their house, they got to do this, they got to do that, the other thing, they got to pay support. I don't think we need to do any of that stuff. I don't think we need to get into any of that. Just as long as she has a paper that says we're separated, I'm sure that'll be fine for her.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's really helpful about the mediation process is that when the both of you are in the same room with me as the mediator, and whether we do this virtually or in person, I'm I can help facilitate your conversations. So you'll be able to have an opportunity to find out a little bit more about what Bonnie's expectations are about the trial separation, as well as for you to be able to share some of your expectations and test those assumptions as to what might be going on for Bonnie as to why she's interested in going through this. And it may be that some of the conversation around what you do with the property and whether or not there's child support or other kind of support that's paid may still be important for us to talk about, even if it's just a trial separation, depending on how long the separation would be for. And of course, there's always the parenting piece when you have children. And why don't you tell me a little bit more about the kids? What kinds of things are they involved in, and what are their personalities like? What's your relationship like with the children?
I don't see them very much because I'm so busy with driving, and kind of puts you on like a weird sleep schedule too and stuff like that. So oftentimes when I'm home, but when I am home, we like to do kind of dad stuff, I guess, like go fishing and stuff like that. Like the little one, the 3-year-old Stacy, she's too young to do much of that yet, but she still, takes along, plays on the beach, that sort of thing. Our oldest son, Brian, was majorly into sports and stuff like that. So I'd help him with things, just dad stuff that way. Penny, she's like really like artistic and into that kind of artsy fartsy stuff that I don't really know anything about, but their mom Bonnie, she's good with that kind of stuff because she has her Mary Kay business and stuff. So yeah, but they're good kids. They're a little wild. I think that sometimes Bonnie gets a little stressed out, which is probably one of the reasons why she thinks she needs a separation is just because she's actually stressed about the kids. It's nothing to do with me. I don't think, but anyway, yeah.
Well, it sounds like the kids have lots of things that going on for them, and that when you are at home, you have these other ways in which you spend time with them, and Bonnie has those primary responsibilities for while you are on the road. And when you do have 3 children, of course, there is a lot of activity that's going on. So your thought that maybe Bonnie's a little stressed would be something that you could explore further in mediation, because there may be some other options, either in addition to a child separation or different than a child separation, that could potentially address those problems for her, if indeed those are problems. So what's your level of communication like with Bonnie? Do you have these kinds of conversations on your own, and what does that look like?
I don't know. I'm gone so much, so we mostly just text, and then when I'm home, it's just nag. Like, oh, clean out the eaves troughs, like all the stuff that doesn't get done because, she can't do it or whatever. Oh, change the oil, mow the lawn, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I don't know. We don't really get too deep into things.
So it's, that's not uncommon, of course, that in all relationships, communication can become a bit different than the way that it started, and maybe looks different than what you expected it would be like. And when you add some of these other things like being away and having all of the tasks that, still need to be done around the home and with parenting, that it's, communication can be difficult. So one of the goals that we often seek to achieve in mediation is to think about how to improve that communication while you're in a separation period, whether it's trial or more permanent. Communication is even that much more important, because there are more layers of things to have to sort out when you're trying to figure out parenting schedules and who's responsible for what expense and what you're going to continue to jointly contribute to, etc. So there'll be lots of things that we'll need to talk about, including what your communication patterns look like. Is there anything that, if I was to see you and Bonnie have a fight, what would that look like?
I don't know. We don't really fight. It's mostly like her telling me what to do, and then maybe I'll make like a sarcastic comment or something, or something like that.
Yelling or any kind of real, it sounds like it's a little, it's a not necessarily on the same page, but it's pretty low key as far as that conflict between the two of you.
Yeah, and mostly like if there's any kind of problem, I'm on the road again right away, so it doesn't really matter. And then it's usually like either blown over or we've forgotten about it by the time I get back.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit like what you were speaking to before, where you sort of have an expectation that this is maybe just a phase that Bonnie's going through, that pattern would continue where, well, there's where you've seen you have a disagreement, but if you leave, then it just sort of disappears without you having to engage with it.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that, if you find out through the mediation process that the separation period is going to be longer than maybe what you are expecting right now, or even while it's, a shorter period, do you have any particular priorities that you're wanting to ensure that certain things get looked after, or that when you look back on all of this afterwards, you can say, oh yes, this is how we did this, and that was what I was wanting?
Yeah, I don't really know. I haven't really thought about it in any kind of sense of like it being a permanent thing. I just kind of figure I'll go stay with my folks for a few months. If she needs help, like if Bonnie needs help with some groceries or, whatever, I'll probably keep paying the mortgage, that kind of stuff. But I guess if it's like more permanent, we'll have to figure out something else, because I'm not going to be able to, I can stay with my folks for as long as forever, it doesn't really matter, but it's just more like if we're gonna have to start doing something where the kids stay with me, like the grandparents would be really happy to have them over, but there's not really enough space for them all to have their own room and stuff like that. So I don't really know how we're going to make the dollars stretch to afford 2 places. Like 3 kids take up a lot of space. And the house that we live in already is probably above our means in terms of how much it costs. So if I have to pay for that house and then a house that's similar proportions to accommodate the kids and stuff, like, I don't know how that's all going to work, because I assume that Bonnie's probably going to want spousal support. Like, she's got her Mary Kay business, but you know, who knows how stable that is. I'm the one with like the real stable income. She won't be able to afford that place by herself.
So I'm hearing some questions about how the finances will play out, and even how residency might work out depending on how long-term the separation is. And you've mentioned your parents a couple of times, so they're a good part of your support in your life. What is that? Are they pretty active in your life?
Yeah, I mean, we're fairly close. They live like a few blocks, not from here because I'm not at home right now, but they live
right.
a few blocks away from our house, and they're really involved grandparents. Like when Brian was playing sports and stuff before all this pandemic nonsense, you know, they were coming out to games and stuff like that. My dad, he comes fishing with us, and yeah, we're pretty tight. And like I said, I mean, I lived there right up until Bonnie and I bought our house. So it's no problem for me to go stay there again.
Mm-hmm. And are there any other adults that are part of your family, you know, system? There are people that are good supports to either you or Bonnie or the kids that are involved in your day-to-day lives?
I think Bonnie relies a lot on her mom and her sister to help out with the kids when I'm gone.
Okay.
I don't really have that great of a relationship with them or anything. I'm not really close with them, but I think that that's something that's important, and like for Bonnie anyway, like that support. And then again, when Brian was playing sports and stuff like that, he had like a really big support network of people in that community. And though I was gone like quite a bit, I did like do a little bit of volunteering here and there when I could. So I was pretty close with the guys and stuff like that, like on the hockey team and like the dads and stuff like that from that. But I mean, it's so easy to fall out of touch when you're going all the time, and then when everything's canceled because of a pandemic. Like, I haven't hung out with those dudes in a while, so but maybe the fall that'll change again.
Right. Well, everything's kind of a bit of a moving target, and that's the other advantage to mediation, is that whatever arrangements you and Bonnie might decide to put into place now, we have the ability to review those and to see what's working and what needs to be tweaked. And so as you go along, and even as things change going into the fall with things like school and other activities for the children, some of those decisions you might not be able to make right now, and that we would revisit those through the mediation process. So there are lots of options available to you. Is there anything that you're concerned about? I know you had mentioned just thinking about the money and wondering how that was all going to work. Anything else that it might be important for me to know to help you?
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like Bonnie's probably just like a little out to lunch on this whole thing. I'm sure she thinks that she can keep the house and she can keep the kids, and I'll pay her all this support and things will just be la-di-da, even better than when we're together. But I don't really think that that's how separations go. I think it's tough for the whole family financially, and with like the whole different structure. I think that she just kind of is in la la land because I'm gone all the time. I don't think she realizes how much I actually do contribute and how much easier it is when you have an intact family. But hey, maybe she's right. Maybe this will be better for everyone.
So I'm hearing that you're open to sort of just considering what the options are. You're a little concerned that Bonnie might have a different set of expectations than what this will actually look like. But your priority, it would sound like, is to be able to try to work through things in a way that keeps them from escalating. It doesn't sound like you're particularly comfortable or enjoy being in conflict. So we want to be able to still talk about the important things that need to be talked about, but do it in a way that can maintain sort of a way in which you and Bonnie and the children are all able to work together and keep those relationships healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I'm going to be connecting further with Bonnie, and we'll need to discuss your work schedule and see when you're back in Saskatoon about scheduling another meeting. So we might have another conversation like this to help prepare for that. But I'm glad that we had a few minutes here today. So stay safe and travel safely, and I will stay in touch with you by email. But if something comes up on your end, don't hesitate to give me a call or shoot me off a message yourself.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks for
All
your time.
right. Okay. Take care, Parker. Bye. So now that you've had a little inside glimpse into a conversation with both Bonnie and Parker, you have probably been jotting down some things on your own that you were hearing them speak to. And I do want to just make the point that a typical individual meeting like that would be something that you would expect to spend a half an hour or an hour with each party, if not longer, depending on the situation. You would gather some of those more specific details, such as the children's birth dates and their names, and even the date of marriage or when people started to live together. You might even have that kind of on an intake form, and you wouldn't necessarily get all of those specific details, even things like where you work and how much money you make, but it does come up in conversation. The other thing that's important to keep in mind, and isn't part of our discussion in this particular workshop, is that you'll always be screening for intimate partner violence. So there are different tools that you can use for that, and you may also have your own ways of which you sort of ask questions and things that you watch for, and we really encourage you to take additional training with respect to that issue in particular, the intimate partner violence, being able to recognize signs for that, as well as know how to use the screening tools that are available and how you manage that in mediation. And so if you have any questions about where you can get some additional training in that regard, just let us know. So as you know, knowing that that's usually part of the process as well, let's talk about Bonnie and Parker and what we learned in our interviews with them, because what you're going to do is take your notes from that interview and both of those interviews, and you're really going to map out their family systems. So think about the people that each of them referred to, their understandings of the dynamic between them individually as well as the other people that are in their lives, the ways in which they described the children and their levels of activity, their personalities, other things that they were involved in. And what I'm showing you here on this slide is just an example of a diagram, and you've probably seen genograms before, or the organizational structures at a workplace, and you know that when these are drawn out that there are certain standard symbols that mean certain things, whether it's a reflection of gender or it's a reflection of the relationship, or if it's a broken relationship. But don't feel limited to those parameters, because nobody else is looking at your map. The map is there for your benefit so that you can draw out the family system, identify where there's some stressors, identify where there seem to be some strengths, make notes to yourself about things that maybe you have some curiosity about that you're wanting to explore further. It's a great place to jot down some of the important words that you've heard the client speak to, and you might end up drawing a map for each of the parents. So you might have a map based on how Bonnie has described the situation, and a map based on how Parker has described the situation, and then look at them together to create even a third map that combines those, the different things that each of them said. Or you might start with one template that you just add to as you go along, getting to know them and their family better from meeting to meeting. The value of mapping out a system cannot be overemphasized, and it is fundamental to your file. And though it's not maybe a drafting topic in that it's not something that uses a lot of words, it can. If you're more of a linear thinker and you want to actually do bullet points and write out different things and have lines to show how they're connected to each other, you can. If you're extra artistic and you want to even use, Play-Doh or other little like figures, and then take a photograph of what you're visualizing the system to look like, and build a library in that way for your file. You might just like to draw, and you might not be a good artist, so that's okay. Nobody's going to come and critique your file. You are not sharing your map of the family system with the clients, though I know that sometimes if you have clients who are very creative themselves, you might actually invite them to draw out their understanding of their family system. It can be very powerful for them to recognize for themselves where they have their sources of tension and where they have their supports, and how they're wanting to maintain certain relationships and other relationships that are going to have to shift, and roles that are going to have to change based on their separation. And in Bonnie and Parker's place, even if situation, even if it's only a temporary separation, they still have to think about what does that look like. And you can draw houses, you can put your references to, we heard about soccer, we heard about fishing, we heard about the Mary Kay business and being in a truck, and the other grandparents that are involved and the auntie that's involved. And so these are all things that you can draw out so you can kind of get a sense of the lay of the land, in addition to whatever notes maybe you scribbled for yourself or typed up during the meeting. So after the first part of this prepare phase, where you've met with your clients, you want to build in a reflective time, which is still part of your prepare phase, but it's reflection to be able to think about everything that you heard your clients share with you, and so that you can just kind of start to get a sense of who they are and what the issues may be that they're going to need to talk about and explore in the joint sessions. And so you can't really very efficiently just have those meetings, jot down some notes, and then go on to the next thing. That doesn't mean you have to reflect upon the meeting immediately after the meeting. For some people, it's, you might build in your reflection time the next day, because you like to have an opportunity to sleep on what you've heard so that you're fresh the next day, and whatever additional sort of insights that have come overnight by sleeping on it that you're able to jot down. But whether you do it immediately or the next day, make sure that you're including that reflection time in your schedule so that you are able to better and prepare for the next meetings, and whether those are some more individual meetings that you might have to schedule, or you're going into the joint meeting. So you're creating your file with documents that so far we know is your business document, your retainer agreement between each party and both of them collectively, and the agreement to mediate, which at this stage you have not executed yet, likely because you haven't had your joint meeting, but you've already created it, you've provided it to the parties to be able to review in preparation for the joint meeting, so you can find out what questions that they have, and they can execute, everybody nodding their heads that they're agreeing to the process and the parameters of the process and the ground rules. That makes up part of your file. And then your notes from your individual meetings, intake meetings, consultations, whatever you might call them, your notes, so that you're collecting some additional detail about the family. But most importantly, so you're starting to hear a little bit about the story, so you can understand the perspectives of each party, their priorities, their expectations, what some of the assumptions are that they're operating under, what their concerns may be, and their hopes steps and goals for the mediation process. A lot of their answers will start to create some working theories for yourself around their underlying beliefs, values, fears, and needs, and you're jotting that down in your file as well. Keeping in mind your file could be a paper file, it could be an electronic file, it can be actual words and sentences, it can be drawings, it could be a collage for that matter. This is building your file to help you prepare for the very important work you're going to be doing with the parties in their joint sessions. And so in our next video for this workshop, we're going to be talking about that middle part. So what does it look like to be documenting the process as you go along from meeting to meeting? So I look forward to having you back for that next video. And between now and then, to go back to Bonnie and Parker, practice with a friend or family member, explaining your retainer agreement to them. Try drawing out a map based on the interview that you watched, or both of those interviews, to get a sense of what that family system looks like, and start identifying for yourself what you think some of the stressors are, some of the supports that the family has, and what some of the issues are likely that they're going to need to make decisions about. Start to hunch at some of those underlying interests, and then we will be imagining ourselves having joint meetings with Bonnie and Parker going forward, and how we will document that.